Welcome to StarWind's webinar on how to create a cost-effective SQL Server cluster. My name is Ross Mistry and I'm a SQL Server MVP. I'm also a partner and principal consultant with Convergent Computing, CCO. My specialties are high availability clustering, specifically with SQL Server. I'm also an author on many books based upon Microsoft technologies, and my latest titles are SQL Server 2008 Management and Administration and also Windows Server 2008 Unleashed. If you have any questions, feel free to follow me on Twitter and send me a direct message. So today's session will focus on building a SQL Server cluster based upon SQL Server 2008, running on Windows Server 2008, and StarWind's iSCSI SAN solution will be utilized for the SAN storage or the shared storage affiliated with the cluster. Before we do the actual step-by-step installations, I will start off by doing a quick overview of failover clustering, talk about some of the prerequisites and the terminologies associated with that, and then we'll dive right into the actual installations. So let's start off with providing a summary of what exactly is a SQL Server failover cluster. So a failover cluster with SQL Server 2008 provides server-level redundancy for an entire instance of SQL Server by leveraging the shared nothing cluster model included with the Enterprise Edition of Windows Server 2008. Now you can install SQL Server 2008 and install a cluster on Windows Server 2003. However, for this session, we'll strictly focus on SQL 2008 running on top of Windows Server 2008. Now, a failover cluster is formed by having at least two or more servers, also known as nodes, connected to shared disk resources. And the picture over here on the bottom right of the screen depicts a high-level SQL Server cluster, and it is leveraging StarWind SAN solution. When SQL Server is installed on a failover cluster, it appears on the network as a single computer. This is independent of how many physical nodes are within the cluster. If the node hosting the SQL Server failover cluster application fails, then another node within the cluster will take on its responsibilities. The failover process is automatic. It does not affect clients or applications. With SQL Server failover clustering specifically, only one node manages particular SQL Server instance, set of disks, and associated services at any given point in time. It's worth noting that a SQL Server cluster can be configured as a single instance or a multiple instance failover configuration. Now, as the names imply, a single instance ultimately means that you're installing one installation or one instance of SQL Server on a failover cluster. And a multiple instance failover configuration means that you're installing more than one SQL Server installation on the failover cluster. For instance, you could have two nodes running 4 instances, or 3 nodes running 2 instances, and where you have 2 active and 1 passive. It's also worth noting that if you are running a multiple instance failover configuration, each instance requires its own set of clustered resources and also its own set of resources from a disk perspective on the SAN solution. Some additional information, and we'll jump right into the step-by-step configurations. So what we're looking at here are the SQL Server 2008 scalability metrics. It's probably beneficial to understand this type of stuff. Therefore, when you architect a solution, you understand which version of SQL is required, which version of Windows is required, how many nodes can be supported, and how many instances can be supported. So ultimately, SQL Server 2008 standard can support up to 2 nodes within a failover cluster. A lot of people don't realize this and they purchase the Enterprise Edition. However, yes, you can install a SQL Server 2008 cluster up to 2 nodes with the Standard Edition. However, it will still require the Enterprise Edition of the operating system in order to achieve the failover cluster. The next thing is the SQL Server 2008 Enterprise Edition. When running on Windows Server 2008 Enterprise Data Center, you can handle up to 16 nodes within the failover cluster. So from a scalability perspective, that's very powerful, and you can create scenarios such as multiple active nodes within the cluster, multiple passive nodes. You can have 12 active nodes, 4 passive nodes. So you definitely have a lot of flexibility in terms of designing and implementing a scalable solution with a 16-node cluster. Other things worth noting from a scale-up perspective is that when running the Enterprise Edition of SQL Server 2008, you can install up to 50 instances on the failover cluster, and when running SQL Server Standard Edition, you can install up to 16 instances of a SQL Server